Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Did you ever mess something up, and no matter how you tried to fix it, it just got worse? It happened with my daughter one day. She came home from school, she had gum in her hair, a whole lot of gum in her hair. And we looked at that and we said, well, somebody said if you put peanut butter in there, it'll come out. Well, now she had gum and peanut butter in her hair, and it was worse. And somebody said if you put ice on it, it'd be easier to get out. Now she had hard gum and peanut butter in her hair. It didn't get worse, it get better, it got worse. Finally, we ended up having to cut her hair. The story that you're kind of familiar with, but you probably don't know the background to it. The story of David and Bathsheba is a story of somebody trying to fix something and just making it worse all the way along the line. The guy that's trying to fix it is David. You don't always get the background in Sunday school. That's why we call this Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. We're going to give you some of the background today of that story that's probably familiar to many of you, maybe unfamiliar to some of you. David, we're told in 2 Samuel 11, that it was the spring of the year, verse 1, the time when kings go forth to battle. So the battles were fought most often in the spring and summer. David ordinarily would be out of the city with his troops in whatever battle the nation was undertaking at that time. But David sent Joab, his general, and stayed back in Jerusalem himself. First mistake. David should have been on the battlefield. He wasn't. He's back in Jerusalem. While everybody else is gone, all the soldiers are gone, David's walking along the top of the palace wall and can see down into the neighbors' backyards. And in one of those yards, one of those gardens, there was a young, beautiful woman taking a bath. Now, that was not unusual. You didn't have bathrooms in the house, so you went out into the walled area where nobody could really see in, you thought. But David could. And so mistake number 2, David's a peeping Tom. Now, he could have stopped there and he wouldn't have been in a whole lot of trouble. If he'd had his lust under control, he'd have been all right. But he didn't. And he invites Bathsheba up for more than tea and crumpets. And after their encounter, Bathsheba turns up pregnant. Now, David had not only violated rules of adultery, but in effect, he also jeopardized the whole nation's war effort. Because one of the rules of holy war was that none of the men involved in holy war, including the king, could have sexual intercourse while the armies were on the battlefield. And David's now violated that as well. So David didn't go to battle. David's a peeping Tom. David didn't control his lust. David committed adultery, and David violated the rules of holy war. You see what I mean? It's getting worse with every step. Now he's got a problem. Oh, he's a king. If she were single, he'd just take her into his harem, but she's not single. She's married. Not only is she married, she's married to one of David's most honest, most trusted soldiers, a guy by the name of Uriah. In fact, he's Uriah the Hittite, not an Israelite. So David invites Uriah back from the battlefield. Let's cover this up some more. If we can get Uriah to come back real soon and sleep with his wife, he and the whole city will assume that the baby is theirs. Uriah the Hittite is more faithful in this situation to the God of Israel than is David the Israelite and the king of Israel. Uriah the Hittite realizes that if he sleeps with his wife, that jeopardizes the holy war effort. Didn't bother David a few weeks before, but it bothers Uriah, not an Israelite, bothers him a great deal. And so one night he just sleeps on the front porch. He didn't want to give any indication that he's violating those rules of holy war. Doesn't want to give any indication to the city that that might be the situation. So David tries to get him drunk. That doesn't work either. Well, that fix didn't work. So we still have a pregnant Bathsheba, a guilty David, and in this case, a unknowing Uriah. So David sends Uriah back to the front with a note for Joab. And the note in effect says, put Uriah where the fighting is the hardest and blow the retreat and leave him standing there to die. Well, now we've added murder. Joab, the faithful general, does what he's told. The army pulls back, Uriah stands there by himself, and Uriah is killed. David now goes to Bathsheba, adds her to the harem, and David is going to go on like nothing happened. And we have one more crime. David thinks he is king, is above the whole law. God doesn't think so. And God calls Nathan the prophet. And he tells Nathan, you got to go tell the king that he messed up. Now I want to talk to Nathan when I get to heaven, because I think Nathan's got to be shaking in his boots. He knows that David has just had Uriah killed. He knows to what extent he's gone to try to cover this whole thing up. And he's going to go to the king of the nation and tell him that he's a sinner. We aren't told that God gave him the words, and I think Nathan must have been thinking, how do I tell the guy this? How do I tell him? I can't just come out and say, you know, you had Uriah killed, that's murder, and you're wrong. So Nathan comes up with a story. There was a man who had hundreds of sheep, and his neighbor had one little lamb. And the rich man went to throw a big feast, and so he went to the neighbor, swiped his lamb, had it killed, and they ate it. Oh, David was livid. He was beside himself. He said, you can't do that. They can't get away with that. Go hang that man. Go kill that man. That's wrong. And in one of the great lines of the Bible, Nathan says, I'm sure shaking all over his body, says, you are the man. You had a whole harem. You had all the wives you'd ever want. And you took the one wife of Uriah the Hittite and had him killed. There is the rest of the story. God says that the consequences for David's action, God says through Nathan, would be that that child would die. David mourns for that child. He prays for that child when that child gets sick. The child does die. There is a good news ending to this story too. David is still God's man. He is still called a man after God's own heart, even in spite of all of those sins that I listed from 2 Samuel chapter 11. And David and Bathsheba have another son. And that son they named Solomon. And he would be the next king of the nation. God is a God of grace. If he can love and forgive the sin of David, the multiple sins of David that were done before a whole nation, he can love and forgive you and me for the sins we commit as well. And he does them for Jesus' sake. He forgives them for Jesus' sake, just as he forgave David's sin for Jesus' sake. A story of a mighty man and a mighty sin and a mighty God who continued to love that man.